At dawn, steel shadows broke the horizon. America's warships had returned to the Caribbean once more. U.S. warships, led by the USS Gerald R. Ford, have entered Caribbean waters, sparking accusations, military drills, and diplomatic chaos. The sea was calm when the Gerald R. Ford appeared, 100,000 tons of steel gliding through Caribbean waters. Warning: no announcement, only radar screens lighting up from Puerto Rico to Paramaribo. The world's largest aircraft carrier had returned to Latin America. Washington called it a routine deployment, a continuation of anti-drug operations meant to intercept narco-terrorist networks. But few believed the mission was only about cocaine routes. Officials said traffickers tied to the Venezuelan government were using the region's open seas to move shipments north. The Pentagon claimed it was a matter of regional security, but the timing and symbolism were unmistakable. The Ford Strike Group, accompanied by destroyers and supply ships, represented not just naval presence, but power projection. It was the kind of move nations notice. And remember, for Venezuela, this was déjà vu. Under Trump, similar deployments had preceded diplomatic threats, sanctions, and covert operations. Now, with tensions rekindled, the maneuver felt like history returning under a different flag. Analysts were quick to point out the imbalance: a nuclear-powered carrier against speedboats and small smuggling vessels. A show of strength that spoke louder than policy observers called it disproportionate, even provocative. Latin American commentators whispered about intervention, and across the region, old memories stirred of coups, blockades, and the long reach of American power. The Caribbean had grown quiet again, but never neutral. In Caracas, alarms were not sirens. They were speeches. Broadcasts interrupted regular programming as Venezuela's defense minister stood beside generals declaring the nation under threat. "The great powers," he said, voice rising through static, "are polluting the waters of the Caribbean with hatred, with supremacism, seeking to close the sea for the interests of the United States." Cameras cut to troops marching through the streets. The operation was named Plan Independencia 200, a nationwide mobilization ordered by President Nicolas Maduro at dawn. 200,000 troops, militias, and reservists moved into position, barracks filled, roads cleared. Across the nation, citizens woke to the sound of engines and drums. "This," the general continued, "is the higher phase of our defense: air, land, naval, missile, all integrated." Behind him, maps glowed red and blue: defense grids, radar fields, coastal batteries. The language was military, but the tone was revolutionary. A new bill was already before the National Assembly: the special law for the commands of integral defense. It called for every state institution, every regional council, every citizen to act as part of a united front. The message was clear: the state and the army were now one. In plazas, murals of Bolivar and Chavez reappeared under fresh paint. Crowds chanted slogans of sovereignty and defiance. Many Venezuelans, it was theater, but to others, survival. The memory of foreign pressure was not abstract. It lived in sanctions, in scarcity, in fear. Venezuela framed the U.S. presence not as policing, but as provocation, an attempt to test its will, to intimidate its revolution. And as the general ended his broadcast, his final words echoed through the night: "There has been no pause, and there will be no pause. We defend the homeland, always." Plan Independencia 200 is not new. It was born from the idea that every Venezuelan, soldier or civilian, must be a guardian of sovereignty. In its earliest drafts, it blended the structure of a national army with the spirit of a people's militia, a hybrid defense doctrine designed for endurance, not victory. Today, that plan has entered what commanders call its higher phase. No longer confined to training fields or symbolic marches, the exercise now resembles a nationwide rehearsal for war. Roadblocks appear at key highways. Reservists report to local bases. Factories and fuel depots conduct emergency readiness tests. It is not a mobilization for show. It is a statement of intent. Defense officials say 200,000 personnel have been activated, a mixture of professional soldiers, police, and civilian volunteers. They practice command and control simulations, coordinate air and naval maneuvers, and test short-range missile systems along the northern coast. State television carries every step in slow, solemn broadcasts. Patriotic songs fade beneath the voice of Maduro declaring, "The homeland will never kneel." The strategy is not about confronting the U.S. directly. That would be impossible. Instead, it aims to make any intervention politically unthinkable and militarily costly. By weaving defense into the nation's identity, the government transforms security into ideology. Every drill becomes a ritual of resistance, every uniform a symbol against imperial power. To Caracas, this is not merely a plan, it is survival made visible. Across the sea in Washington, the language sounds clinical and familiar. Officials describe the same region not as a battlefield, but as a crime corridor. According to the Pentagon, the deployment of the Gerald R. Ford and its escorts forms part of a multinational anti-drug initiative targeting what they call narco-terrorist networks linked to Nicolás Maduro's regime. The term itself, narco-terrorism, was popularized during Trump's presidency, a rhetorical weapon that blurred the line between cartel and state. In official briefings, the U.S. accuses high-ranking Venezuelan officers of collaborating with traffickers who move cocaine through Caribbean routes toward Central America and Europe. The mission, they say, is to cut the flow before it reaches U.S. shores. On paper, it is a law enforcement operation. In reality, it looks like a show of dominance. Few traffickers operate from airstrips or naval fleets that justify the presence of a supercarrier and strike group. Even allies have quietly questioned the scale. Does fighting speedboats require an armada? Human rights organizations and independent observers echo that skepticism. They warn that the narco-terror framing provides legal and political cover for coercive diplomacy, the use of military threat to achieve regime change. For critics, the operation's intent is not interception, but intimidation. Still, Washington insists the goal is stability, not war. But in a sea already crowded with mistrust, every maneuver carries meaning, and every justification sounds like preparation. Renata Segura, Latin America director at the International Crisis Group, has spent years dissecting the intersection of politics, military power, and perception across the hemisphere. Her assessment of the renewed U.S. naval deployment is blunt, disproportionate, even by Washington's own standards. To her, the justification of combating drug trafficking does not align with the scale of the mobilization destroyers, carrier groups, and surveillance aircraft, she notes, far exceed the tools required for maritime interdiction. The message, she says, is not about cocaine routes. It's about deterrence and about showing force to remind Maduro where the lines are. Segura believes Caracas is rightly worried. From her vantage, Venezuela's military posture is not aggression, but anxiety. A small nation signaling readiness to avoid humiliation. When U.S. fleets move within visual range of Venezuelan waters, she argues, it activates a defensive nationalism that Maduro then amplifies through ideology and broadcast. Her greater concern lies beyond the Caribbean. Regional capitals, from Bogotá to Buenos Aires, are quietly uneasy, she says. The precedent is dangerous. If today it's Venezuela, tomorrow it could be anyone who defies Washington's interests. While many Latin American governments condemn Maduro's authoritarian tendencies, most also reject foreign intervention as a solution. Venezuelan state media repeats a mantra, calor, calor, calor. Heat, heat, heat. It's a call to stay vigilant, to burn with patriotic fervor. Behind the imagery of marching soldiers and waving flags lies a deliberate psychological rhythm. Repetition to anchor emotion, melody to overwrite doubt. In both narratives, truth is secondary to persuasion. U.S. networks frame operations as precision policing, avoiding the word war. Venezuelan outlets brandish images of schoolchildren saluting anti-aircraft guns. Each side manipulates fear, one through security, the other through survival. The result is an information fog thicker than any smoke from a carrier's decks. Latin America has seen this script before. Panama, 1989. Grenada, 1983 Nicaragua, the Contra years. Each began as a security operation. Each ended with intervention scars. Today, leaders walk a narrow ridge between condemnation and caution. Most openly reject Nicolás Maduro's repression, Yet none want a new invasion under the Stars and Stripes. The fear is simple. If Washington claims a right to intervene in Caracas, who stands safe tomorrow? Regional blocs, CELAC and the Organization of American States, issue carefully worded appeals for diplomacy. No side wants to appear weak, yet no nation wishes to ignite a chain reaction that could redraw alliances overnight. In this quiet tension, Latin America once again finds itself between two fires: the weight of empire and the gravity of its own past. Every statement, every silence, becomes a calculation in survival. The deployment of the USS Gerald R. Ford thus plays two roles: a deterrent abroad and a campaign message at home. It signals strength to a domestic base that equates toughness with patriotism, the MAGA worldview where power must always be visible and diplomacy looks like weakness. But in pursuing these optics, Washington risks alienating its own hemisphere. Latin America, long wary of U.S. interference, sees old ghosts returning in modern uniform. And so, ideology sails beside the carrier, invisible, yet steering its course through waters already haunted by history. The question lingers beneath every headline. Could this actually turn into war? For now, analysts call the probability of a ground invasion low. The U.S. has neither the manpower nor political appetite for another protracted campaign in Latin America. But the danger lies elsewhere. A limited strike, a naval skirmish, or an aerial miscalculation that spirals out of control, Renata Segura's assessment remains clear-eyed. Washington, she says, no longer fights full wars. It fights moments. Precision missiles, drone reconnaissance, and selective bombardments replace occupations. The risk is not a strategy, but an accident. A single misidentified vessel, an unauthorized radar lock, or an engine failure misread as provocation could ignite a chain of retaliation. Both navies now operate within proximity, their communication lines tense, their crews on alert. Each maneuver is a message, and every message risks being misunderstood. In Caracas, Maduro's readiness drills are not just a performance. They reflect a genuine fear that one mistake could justify an American strike. Inside Venezuela's command centers, officers rehearse scenarios of electronic warfare, missile defense, and maritime interception. The Caribbean, once a theater of commerce and tourism, now feels like a chessboard under storm clouds. Every piece alive, every move irreversible. Beneath the banners and broadcasts, ordinary Venezuelans bear the weight of confrontation. Years of sanctions, inflation, and shortages have hollowed the economy. Basic goods, fuel, medicine, food, move through black markets and bartered exchanges. Now, war fear deepens uncertainty. When warships appear on television, markets react before diplomats do the currency slides. Shops close early. Families whisper about leaving. Again. State media urges resilience, promising unity and revolutionary calm. But in the barrios, patience whereas thin people survive one crisis only to meet another. Between sanctions and fear, hope becomes a luxury few can afford. This is not the first time U.S. power has hovered near Latin shores. In 1823, the Monroe Doctrine declared the Western Hemisphere a protected American sphere. Over a century later, that doctrine still whispers beneath every deployment. From Guatemala in 1954 to Cuba's blockade and Chile's coup, the pattern repeats. Intervention wrapped in the language of security, freedom, or stability. Maduro, for all his faults, invokes that lineage to frame himself as the latest target of the empire. And Washington, knowingly or not, keeps reviving its own ghosts. History in the Caribbean never sleeps. It simply changes uniforms. Three futures now drift on the horizon. First, a path of diplomatic de-escalation. Mediators from Brazil or Mexico could quietly broker distance between fleets, turning military theater into cautious dialogue. Second, an extended standoff. The U.S. keeps its carrier group nearby, a pressure valve, not a trigger. Venezuela continues its drills, each side using the spectacle to rally domestic support. Third, a flashpoint. A radar misfire, a reckless patrol, or a political provocation sparks a limited exchange. A few missiles, a few lives, and a decade of consequences. Every outcome is shaped by fear and perception, not just policy. And as long as both sides find power and tension, calm will remain temporary. As warships shadow Venezuela's shores, both sides trade threats and justifications. But beneath the gunmetal and slogans lies an older question. Is this truly about drugs, democracy, or dominance? And when the Caribbean heats up again, who will be left to count the cost? The powerful or the people?